They say the master killed every slave on his land. The next day, 500 black Union soldiers surrounded the plantation and war broke out. And if you heard what Lila Cato saw that night, you'd understand why this story still chills people to the bone. It began with one man, Silas Breckinridge, so terrified of losing power that he tried to wipe every life from his fields before dawn. But one survivor crawled out of the mud. Lila, a young woman who watched her whole world burn in a single night. And when Sergeant Isaiah Holt found her shaking in the woods, he knew this wasn't just cruelty. It was something darker, something done with planning and pride. At sunrise, the ground trembled under the boots of 500 black Union soldiers, men who had once lived under men like Silas. They didn't come for mercy. They came for the truth buried under the ashes. But here's the part no one forgets. When justice finally arrived, Lila had to choose: tell the story of the dead, or become the fire Silas feared most. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The rain began as a whisper against the windows of the Breckinridge Manor, then grew into something heavier. Thunder rolled across the Virginia countryside like distant cannon fire, and Silas Breckinridge stood at the parlor window, watching darkness swallow his land. The courier had left an hour ago. His words still echoed in Silas's mind. Black regiments, moving west through Harrison County, recruiting every freed slave they find. Silas's hands trembled as he poured himself another glass of bourbon. The crystal decanter clinked against the rim. Outside, lightning split the sky and illuminated rows of slave quarters in the distance, small wooden structures that housed the people who worked his tobacco field and kept his estate running. Witnesses, that's what they were. Every single one of them had seen too much. They knew about the beatings in the barn, the woman who disappeared after refusing him, the boy who died from infection after punishment went too far, the endless humiliations and cruelties that Silas believed were his right as master. If the Union came, if those black soldiers marched onto his property with their rifles and their authority, if they started asking questions. Silas drained his glass. His reflection stared back from the rain-streaked window. A man of 43 with graying hair and eyes that had grown harder over the years. He had inherited this plantation from his father, who inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of Breckinridge prosperity built on the backs of people they owned. He would not be the one to lose it all. The door to the parlor opened. Jacob Harlow stepped inside, water dripping from his coat. The overseer was a lean man with weathered skin and eyes that showed nothing. He had worked for Silas for 12 years and never once questioned an order. "You sent for me, sir." Silas turned from the window. The bourbon had steadied his hands, but not his voice. "Close the door." Jacob did as he was told. Rain hammered the roof above them. "The war is turning," Silas said. He walked to his desk and sat down heavily. "The Yankees are bringing black soldiers into our counties, arming them, giving them authority." Jacob's expression didn't change. "Yes, sir. If they come here, if they start talking to our people." Silas leaned forward. "Everything we've built will be used against us. They'll parade them through Richmond, make examples of us. What would you have me do?" Silas met his overseer's eyes. The next words came easier than they should have. "Before dawn, I want every one of them gone. No witnesses, no testimony, no one left to tell stories when the Yankees arrive." Jacob stood perfectly still. Rain continued to drum against the windows. Thunder growled in the distance. "All of them?" Jacob asked quietly. "Every single one." Silas's voice hardened. "Take Garrett and Thomas. Use the rifles from the barn. Make it quick, and make it thorough. When the sun rises, I want this property clean." Jacob nodded slowly. "And the bodies? There's a ravine past the south field. Deep enough. Silas pulled a ledger from his desk drawer and opened it. Names filled the pages, 43 people who lived and worked on his land. He took a pen and drew a single black line through every entry. After it's done, burn this ledger. Burn everything. If anyone asks, they all ran off during the storm, scattered into the woods when they heard Yankees were coming. Yes, sir. Jacob. Silas looked up from the ruined ledger. This stays between us. No one else can know the truth. Not ever. The overseer touched his hat brim. I understand. He left the parlor without another word. Silas listened to his footsteps fade down the hall, then the sound of the front door opening and closing. Through the window, he watched Jacob's lantern disappear into the storm. Silas poured himself another bourbon. His hands were steady now. In the slave quarters, Lila Cato helped her young cousin Samuel into his sleeping shirt. The boy was 7 years old with wide eyes and a smile that appeared too rarely these days. Rain leaked through gaps in the roof and pooled in corners of their small room. Can you tell me a story? Samuel asked. Lila pulled the thin blanket over him. It's late. You need sleep. Just a short one. She sat on the edge of the straw mattress they shared. All right. One story. Before she could begin, voices drifted from the next room. The elders were talking in low tones. Lila recognized the voice of old Moses, who had been on this plantation longer than anyone. I heard it from a field hand over at the Harrison place, Moses said. Black soldiers wearing Union blue, freeing whole plantations at a time. That's just talk, another voice responded. Don't mean nothing for us. It means everything, Moses insisted. It means the war is changing. It means we might see the other side of this. Lila felt Samuel's hand grip hers. Hope was a dangerous thing. She had learned that years ago when her mother died from fever, and the master refused to send for a doctor. Hope could break you faster than any whip. Tell me about the ocean, Samuel whispered. Lila stroked his hair. I've never seen the ocean. But you know stories about it. She did. Stories passed down from grandparents who remembered the voyage across dark waters. Stories of freedom that existed somewhere beyond the fields and the quarters and the endless work. Outside, the storm grew fiercer. Lightning flashed bright enough to illuminate everything through the gaps in the walls. Thunder followed immediately after, close now, almost overhead. Then Lila saw them, shadows moving between the buildings, torches flickering in the rain. 3 men walking with purpose toward the quarters. Her breath caught. Samuel sat up. What is it? Hush. Lila stood slowly and moved to the window. Through the warped glass, she could make out Jacob Harlow's shape. He carried something long and dark. A rifle. The other 2 men were Garrett and Thomas, both poor white laborers who worked as hired hands. They were armed too. Lila's heart began to pound. Something was wrong. Overseers didn't walk the quarters at night with guns. Not like this. Not moving in formation. A door banged open somewhere in the complex. A woman's voice called out in confusion. Then came the gunshot. The crack split the night louder than thunder. Screams erupted immediately after. Horrible sounds of terror and confusion. Another shot. Then another. Lila spun from the window and grabbed Samuel's hand. Get up. Now. The boy's eyes went wide with fear. What's happening? She pulled him from the mattress as boots thundered past their door. More shots. More screaming. The whole quarters had exploded into chaos. Lila's mind raced. The door. The window. Which way? Where could they go? Samuel's hand tightened around hers as the screaming grew closer. Lila yanked Samuel through the doorway into chaos. Rain slashed sideways across the quarters. Fire bloomed from the building nearest the main path. Orange flames licking up through a collapsed roof despite the downpour. People ran in every direction. A woman clutched an infant to her chest and sprinted toward the woods. An old man stumbled and fell in the mud. Another gunshot cracked through the storm. The old man didn't get up. "Lila!" Someone grabbed her shoulder from behind. She spun and found herself face to face with her Uncle Reuben. He was a broad-shouldered man of 50, with silver threading his hair and steady hands that had taught her to tie knots and skin rabbits and survive. "This way. Now." He pulled them away from the main cluster of buildings where the shooting was concentrated. Samuel sobbed against Lila's side as they ran. Her bare feet slipped in the mud. Rain soaked through her thin dress in seconds. Behind them, Jacob Harlow's voice cut through the storm. "Check every building, every corner. Don't leave anyone." They ran past the wash house, past the tool shed. Reuben led them toward the smokehouse, a low brick structure that sat at the edge of the property where the grounds sloped down toward the south fields. Lila could barely see through the rain and darkness. Lightning flashed, and she glimpsed other figures fleeing into the woods. Not many. Most had been caught in the initial assault on the quarters. A rifle cracked somewhere behind them. Samuel's hand slipped from Lila's grip. She reached back and caught him before he fell. "Keep moving. Don't stop." "I can't." "You can." Reuben's voice was firm, but not harsh. "Just a little further." They rounded the smokehouse, and Reuben pulled them against the wall. The building blocked some of the rain. Lila pressed Samuel between herself and the bricks, while Reuben peered back toward the quarters. More fires had started. The whole complex glowed orange through the storm. "Why are they doing this?" Samuel whispered. His voice broke on the last word. Lila had no answer. She knew cruelty. She knew violence. But this was something different. This was erasure. Complete and deliberate. Reuben turned back to them. His face was grim. "There's a drainage culvert beneath this building. Runs under the foundation and out the other side. You two are going to crawl inside, and you're not coming out until daylight. Understand?" "What about you?" Lila asked. "I'll lead them away from here. Buy you time." He was already moving toward the side of the smokehouse where the ground dipped and water pooled. "Come on." The culvert entrance was narrow, just a dark gap between the brick foundation and the muddy earth. Water rushed through it in a steady stream. Reuben knelt and cleared away debris from the opening. "Uncle Reuben, listen to me." He gripped Lila's shoulders. Rain poured down his face. "You get in there deep as you can. You hold on to Samuel and you don't make a sound no matter what you hear. Promise me." Lila's throat tightened. "I promise." He released her and turned to Samuel. "You're going to be brave for your cousin. Yes?" The boy nodded shakily. "Good. Now go." Lila dropped to her knees in the mud. The culvert opening yawned before her like a mouth. She could smell wet earth and rust and old smoke. Samuel whimpered, but followed as she squeezed through the gap. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Brick scraped against her back. Cold water soaked her from the waist down. Behind her, Samuel struggled through the entrance. "It's too small." "Push harder." Lila reached back and grabbed his wrist. She pulled him forward inch by inch until he tumbled through gasping. They crawled deeper into the darkness. Lila couldn't see anything. Her hands found slick mud and sharp stones. The tunnel curved slightly and narrowed further. Water rushed past them faster now. She kept crawling until her outstretched fingers touched brick. The tunnel continued but became too tight to navigate. This would have to be enough. She pulled Samuel close, and they pressed against the curved wall of the culvert. The boy was shaking violently. Lila wrapped her arms around him and felt his heart hammering against her chest. Outside, footsteps splashed through puddles. "Check the smokehouse." Garrett's voice. Close. Too close. Already did. Nothing inside. "Check it again." Lila held her breath. Samuel buried his face against her shoulder. Through the small gap where they'd entered, she could see a sliver of orange firelight reflecting off standing water. A gunshot rang out somewhere in the distance, then another voice crying for mercy, before being cut short by a third shot. "Please!" an old woman's voice from the direction of the quarters. Lila recognized it. Aunt Sarah, who worked in the big house kitchen. "Please don't. I won't say nothing." "I swear I won't." The gunshot was deafening even through the storm. Samuel's whole body jerked. Lila pressed her hand over his mouth gently and pulled him tighter against her. Tears ran hot down her face and mixed with the cold water streaming past them. More voices, more footsteps. The systematic elimination continued through the quarters. Each shot marked another life ended. Each scream another person she'd known. People who had shared meals and stories and the small dignities they could carve from captivity. Then she heard boots running toward the smokehouse. "Over here!" Thomas's voice. "There's tracks in the mud." Lila's heart stopped. Reuben. He had promised to lead them away. How many? Jacob Harlow's voice now. All 3 hunters had converged on their position. Can't tell. Rain's washing everything out. Footsteps circled the smokehouse. Lila could hear them clearly even through the brick and earth. Her uncle was out there somewhere, drawing attention, keeping his promise. "There!" Garrett shouted. "By the tree line!" A figure broke from cover. Through the narrow gap in the culvert entrance, Lila saw her uncle running toward the woods. His silhouette was clear against the burning quarters behind him. 3 rifles rose. "No!" Lila whispered against Samuel's hair. "No, no, no!" The shots came simultaneously. Reuben stumbled. His legs gave out. He collapsed face first into the mud 20 yards from where they hid. Lila bit down on her own hand to keep from screaming. The 3 men approached Reuben's body. Jacob prodded it with his boot. "Anyone else run this way?" "Didn't see nobody." "Check the woods anyway. Could be more hiding out there." Garrett and Thomas moved past the smokehouse toward the tree line. Their footsteps faded, but Jacob remained. Lila watched through the gap as he stood over Reuben's body in the rain. Then the overseer turned and walked directly toward the smokehouse. His boots stopped 3 feet from the culvert entrance. Lila could see the leather and mud-caked soles clearly. Samuel had gone rigid in her arms. Neither of them breathed. Jacob stood there for a long moment. Rain drummed on the bricks above them. Water continued rushing through the tunnel. Somewhere in the distance, a child's voice called out before being silenced. The boots shifted, turned. Jacob was looking at something, the culvert entrance. Lila's vision narrowed to just those boots, and the growing certainty that he would kneel down and peer inside and find them huddled in the darkness like animals. Then came a distant shout from the quarters. "Jacob! We got runners heading for the ravine." The boots shifted again. Paused. "Coming!" Jacob called back. He ran toward the sound of the shout. His footsteps grew fainter and finally disappeared entirely. Lila's held breath came out in a shuddering gasp. Samuel sobbed quietly against her. She held him and listened to the storm and the gunfire and the screams that continued through the night. Hours passed. The rain softened to a drizzle. The gunshots became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Lila remained frozen in the culvert with Samuel pressed against her. She listened to boots crunching through wet leaves, voices calling to each other. The systematic search for anyone who might have escaped. She heard 2 men walking directly above them, their weight pressed down on the earth overhead. Dirt and small stones rained into the tunnel. "Think we got them all?" one asked. "Most of them. Jacob wants us to sweep the woods again at first light." "What about the bodies?" "Ravine, like he said. Soon as this rain stops for good." The boots stood inches above Lila's head. She held Samuel tighter and closed her eyes, and made herself as still as the earth around them. The men moved on. Lila waited in the darkness and listened to the storm fade and wondered if she and Samuel were the only ones left alive. The first gray light came slow. Lila became aware of it gradually, a lessening of the absolute darkness inside the culvert. She had lost all sense of time in the blackness. Her body ached from staying motionless for so long. Samuel had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep against her chest. His breathing was shallow but steady. The sounds from above had stopped hours ago. No more footsteps, no more voices, just the drip of water from the smokehouse eaves and the distant call of morning birds who knew nothing of what had happened. Lila shifted carefully. Her legs had gone numb. When she tried to move them, pain shot through her calves like needles. She gritted her teeth and waited for feeling to return. Samuel stirred. "Are we dead?" he whispered. "No, we're alive." "How do you know? Dead people don't hurt this much." She eased him off her lap and began crawling back toward the entrance. The culvert seemed even narrower than before. Her shoulders scraped brick on both sides. Water had risen slightly during the night. It came up to her elbows now as she dragged herself forward. At the entrance, she stopped and listened. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The wrong kind. The kind that came after violence had taken everything worth hearing. Lila pushed debris away from the opening and squeezed through. Cold morning air hit her face. She pulled herself out of the mud and lay on the wet ground, gasping. Samuel crawled out after her and collapsed beside her. They stayed there for a long moment. Neither spoke. Finally, Lila forced herself to stand. Her dress was caked with mud and torn at the shoulders. She was shivering. Samuel rose beside her on unsteady legs. The plantation yard stretched before them in the dawn light. Bodies lay everywhere. Some face down in the mud, others crumpled against walls. A woman Lila recognized as Martha from the weaving house sat propped against the well with her eyes still open. A child no older than 6 lay curled near the quarter's entrance like he was sleeping. The quarters themselves were mostly ash. A few walls still stood, but the roofs had collapsed. Smoke rose from the ruins in thin columns that dissipated in the morning breeze. Lila's knees buckled. She caught herself against the smokehouse wall. "Don't look," she told Samuel. But she couldn't look away herself. Everything was gone. Everyone was... Movement caught her eye. Someone crawled out from beneath the collapsed barn loft at the far end of the yard. An older man Lila didn't immediately recognize. He stood slowly and looked around with the same horrified expression she imagined was on her own face. Then another figure emerged from the root cellar near the vegetable garden. A woman carrying a small child. Then 2 more from the direction of the creek. Lila's heart hammered. "Samuel, stay here!" She ran toward the others. The mud sucked at her feet. She nearly fell twice, but kept moving. The man from the barn loft saw her coming and raised a hand. His face was familiar now. Moses, who worked the tobacco fields. "You made it," he said. His voice was hoarse. "How many?" Lila asked. "Don't know yet. Been hearing movement all around, but I was afraid to call out." The woman with the child reached them. It was Ruth from the laundry house holding her daughter Cora May. The little girl's face was pressed against her mother's shoulder. More survivors appeared. A teenage boy named Elijah emerged from the woods. 2 sisters, twins who worked the kitchen, climbed out of a collapsed chicken coop. An elderly man named Thomas, who Lila thought must have been killed, came limping from behind the carriage house. They gathered behind the smokehouse where Lila had hidden hours before. Everyone was covered in mud or ash. Several were bleeding. All were shaking. Lila counted heads. 11 survivors, including herself and Samuel. 11 out of more than 50. "We need to leave," Moses said, "before they come back." "Where do we go?" one of the twins asked. "Woods. Head north. Find the Union lines. What if we run into Confederate patrols? What if we stay here?" They had no good answers. Ruth held Cora May tighter. The little girl hadn't spoken since emerging from hiding. She just stared at nothing with huge, dark eyes. "We stay together," Lila said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Whatever we do, we don't separate." Everyone nodded. They moved as a group toward the tree line. Lila led with Samuel close behind her. They passed bodies along the way. Some she recognized, Others were too destroyed by fire or violence to identify. She tried not to look, but couldn't help seeing. Uncle Reuben still lay where he'd fallen. His body was cold. Lila knelt beside him briefly. Samuel stood over her. She wanted to say something, words of gratitude or farewell, but her throat had closed completely. She touched his hand once, and then stood and kept walking. The group entered the woods single file. Moses took the rear. They moved quietly through underbrush still wet from rain. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were footsteps on wet leaves and the occasional sob someone couldn't contain. They had gone maybe 200 yards when Elijah at the front suddenly stopped. Lila nearly ran into him. "What?" "Soldiers," he whispered. Everyone froze. Through the trees ahead, 6 men in Union blue moved in a loose patrol formation. They carried rifles. Their uniforms were mud-stained but unmistakable. What made Lila's breath catch was their faces. They were black. Every single one. The lead soldier spotted the group and raised his hand. The patrol stopped. He was tall and broad-shouldered with sergeant stripes on his sleeve. His eyes went from the survivors to the smoke still rising from the plantation beyond. He lowered his rifle immediately. "Don't run!" he called out. His voice was careful, calm. "We're with the 5th United States Colored Infantry. You're safe now." Nobody moved. It felt like a dream, like something that couldn't be real. The sergeant walked forward slowly with his hands visible. "My name is Isaiah Holt. We're scouting ahead of our division." He stopped 10 feet away and took in their condition. The mud, the blood, the terror still written on every face. "What happened here?" Lila found her voice. "Massacre. Last night. The master ordered everyone killed before the Union came." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "How many survived?" 11 of us, that we've found." "How many were there total?" Lila's voice broke. "More than 50. The sergeant turned to his men. "Jackson, Williams, escort these people deeper into the woods. Find shelter and water. The rest of you, come with me." One of the soldiers approached the group gently. "We'll take care of you. Come on." Ruth stepped forward first, still carrying Cora May. The others followed. Lila hesitated. "I need to show you," she told Isaiah. "Where the bodies are." "What they did." Isaiah studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Stay close." They walked back toward the plantation. Isaiah's remaining men spread out in a defensive formation. When they emerged from the tree line and saw the yard, all movement stopped. "Jesus Christ!" one soldier whispered. Isaiah's face went hard as stone. He walked among the dead slowly and methodically. His men followed. They found bodies in the quarter's ruins, behind the well, near the big house, in the ravine where some had tried to flee. 43 in total. When the count was finished, Isaiah stood in the center of the yard. Rain had started again, light and cold. It fell on the bodies and the ash and the living who remained. "Who gave the order?" he asked Lila. "Master Silas Breckenridge. His overseer, Jacob Harlow, carried it out with 2 hired men. Where are they now?" "The big house, I think. That's where they always go." Isaiah looked toward the manor house on the hill. Smoke rose from its chimneys. Windows glowed with lamplight. It looked untouched by the violence that had consumed everything below it. "Private Marsh," Isaiah said, without looking away from the house. "You're the fastest rider here." "Yes, Sergeant." "Take my horse. Ride hard for division headquarters. Tell Colonel Foster we have a massacre scene and survivors who need immediate protection. Tell him—" Isaiah paused. His hands had curled into fists. "Tell him we need 500 men here by tomorrow morning. Full battalion strength." "Yes, Sergeant." Marsh was already moving toward the horses. "And Marsh?" "Sergeant, tell him the perpetrator is still on site, armed, dangerous, and not surrendering to anyone but federal authority." The private mounted and kicked his horse into a gallop. Lila watched him disappear into the trees. She stood in the rain, holding Cora May's small hand. Ruth had stayed with the other survivors, but sent her daughter back to stay near Lila. The little girl squeezed Lila's fingers. Isaiah turned to face the big house again. His expression was unreadable. "They're coming," Lila said quietly. "Your soldiers." "Yes." "What happens when they get here?" Isaiah was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Justice, one way or another." The survivors huddled in a dense thicket half a mile from the plantation. The underbrush was thick enough to hide them, but thin enough that they could see anyone approaching. Ruth had wrapped Cora May in a blanket, one of the soldiers provided. The little girl still hadn't spoken. Isaiah stood at the edge of the thicket with his remaining scouts. He checked his pocket watch for the third time in as many minutes. Corporal Amos Garner noticed. "Still hours before they could possibly arrive," Amos said. "Even if Marsh rode like hellfire." "I know. So, what are we doing? Standing here watching smoke rise from that house?" Isaiah closed the watch. "We're waiting for orders. We have survivors who just lived through a massacre. The man responsible is sitting up in that house probably drinking whiskey. And we're waiting. We're outnumbered. 6 men against however many Breckenridge has with him. Could be 3 men. Could be none. Might just be him and his overseer. Or it could be a dozen armed guards who know we're here and are preparing an ambush." Amos shifted his rifle. "I'm not saying we storm the place. I'm saying we position ourselves, get eyes on the house, set up a perimeter so he can't run before the division arrives." Isaiah looked toward the plantation. The big house sat quiet on its hill. Nothing moved. No one came or went. It looked almost peaceful, except for the smoke still rising from the destroyed quarters below. "He's destroying evidence right now," Lila said. Both men turned. She had approached without them hearing. Samuel stood a few steps behind her. "Miss Cato," Isaiah said, "you should stay with the others. I know this land better than anyone here. I know that house. I know Silas Breckenridge." Her voice was steady. "And I'm telling you he's not sitting idle. He's burning papers, hiding records, maybe preparing to run. We don't know that. He ordered 50 people killed to erase witnesses. You think he's going to sit there and wait for federal soldiers to arrest him?" Amos looked at Isaiah. "She's got a point." Isaiah was quiet for a moment. Then he called over the rest of his scouts, Jackson, Williams, and 2 others whose names Lila hadn't learned yet. "We're going to establish a perimeter," Isaiah said. "Nothing aggressive, just eyes on the property. If anyone tries to leave, we observe and report. We do not engage unless fired upon. Clear?" Everyone nodded. "Jackson, you and Williams take the west approach. Stay in tree cover. I want to know if anyone moves toward the road." "Yes, Sergeant." "Henderson, you're on the east side near the tobacco barns. Watch for movement toward the river." "Got it." "Corporal Garner and I will position north of the house. That leaves—" Isaiah looked at the last scout. "Private Moss, you maintain position here with the survivors. Anyone approaches this thicket who isn't wearing Union blue, you fire a warning shot and pull everyone deeper into the woods." "Understood, Sergeant." The scouts began dispersing. Lila stepped forward. "I'm coming with you," she said. Isaiah shook his head. "You need to stay here where it's safe. I told you. I know this property. Every path, every blind spot, every place someone might hide or run. You need me. Miss Cato, those people back there are alive because I knew where to hide them when your scouts arrived. I found water. I found shelter. I can help you position your men correctly." Isaiah studied her, then looked at Amos. The corporal shrugged. "Tactical advantage is tactical advantage. You stay behind us," Isaiah finally said. "You don't expose yourself, and if shooting starts, you run back here. Understood?" "Understood." They moved through the woods in silence. Lila led them along a path she'd used for years to gather firewood. It wound through dense undergrowth and kept them hidden from the house until they were almost directly behind it. They found a position on elevated ground with a clear view of the manor's rear entrance. Isaiah crouched behind a fallen log. Amos took position near a large oak. Layla stayed low between them. The house looked even more untouched from this angle. White paint still pristine, windows intact, garden paths neatly maintained, like the horror below had never happened. "How many rooms?" Isaiah asked quietly. 12 main rooms, Lila said. Plus servant quarters in the back that connect to the kitchen. Exits? Front door, back door through the kitchen, side entrance through the study. All the windows on the first floor open. Where would he keep records? Documents? Study. First floor, east side. That's where he kept all his ledgers. Isaiah pulled out a small spyglass and scanned the windows. After a moment, he stopped. "There," he said. "Study window. Someone just moved past it." Lila couldn't see from her angle. Was it Silas? Couldn't tell. But someone's inside and awake. They watched in silence. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher but remained hidden behind clouds. The morning stayed gray and cold. Then Amos stiffened. "Sergeant." "I see it." Lila followed their gaze. In the distance beyond the plantation's eastern boundary, a thin column of smoke rose into the sky. Then another. Then a third. "Signal fires," Amos said. "Confederate?" "Has to be. Nobody else out here." Isaiah's jaw tightened. He scanned the horizon with the spyglass. "There, on the far ridge. Riders. How many?" "Can't tell yet. At least a dozen. Maybe more." Lila's stomach dropped. "They're coming here?" "Not sure. Could be passing through. Could be responding to the signals." Isaiah lowered the spyglass. "Could be Breckenridge called for reinforcements before he started the massacre." "That doesn't make sense," Amos said. "Why kill everyone if he had Confederate support coming? Maybe he didn't think they'd arrive in time. Or maybe—" Isaiah stopped. "Maybe what? Maybe the massacre wasn't panic. Maybe it was preparation." The words hung in the air. Lila felt cold spread through her chest. "You're saying he planned this," she said. "Knowing soldiers were coming. Knowing the war was changing. I'm saying a man who kills 50 people in one night isn't acting on impulse. He's following a plan." Amos checked his rifle. "Then we need that battalion here now. They're coming as fast as they can. Might not be fast enough." Movement from the house caught Lila's attention. A figure emerged from the back door, tall, gray-haired, wearing a dark coat. Even from this distance, she recognized him. "That's Silas," she whispered. He walked to the garden edge and looked toward the destroyed quarters below. His posture was rigid, controlled. He stood there for a long moment studying the ruins, like a man surveying property damage after a storm. Then he turned and went back inside. "He's not running," Lila said. "He's waiting." "For what?" "For whoever's coming." Isaiah was about to respond when a sound carried through the trees, distant but distinct. A horn blast, long and clear. Then another. Then the unmistakable rhythm of many boots marching in formation. Amos's face split into a grin. "That's ours." Isaiah stood slowly and looked toward the sound. Through the trees to the north, Lila could see movement. Columns of soldiers in Union blue emerging from the forest. Hundreds of them, and every face she could see was black. The ground trembled beneath Lila's feet. Not from thunder or wind, but from hundreds of boots striking earth in perfect rhythm. They came through the northern tree line first. Rows of soldiers in Union blue marching in tight formation. Their rifles gleamed even under gray sky. Their faces set hard and determined. Every single one of them was black. Lila had never seen anything like it. 50 men. 100. 200. The columns kept coming. They spread across the open ground between forest and plantation with military precision. Officers shouted orders. Companies broke into smaller units and began positioning themselves around the property's perimeter. 500 men, Amos whispered. Sweet Lord. Isaiah stood frozen. His hand gripped his rifle tight, but his eyes were distant. Lila understood. These were men who had been where she was, men who knew what it meant to be property, to be powerless, and now they carried federal authority and rifles. A tall officer on horseback rode to the front of the formation. His uniform was crisp despite days of marching. He wore captain's bars and a saber at his hip. His eyes scanned the plantation with the careful assessment of a man trained for war. "That's Tolland," Isaiah said. "Captain Elias Tolland. He commands the entire regiment. You know him? Fought under him at Milliken's Bend. Good officer. Fair. Strategic." The captain spotted Isaiah's position and rode toward them. Isaiah stepped out from cover and saluted. Lila and Amos followed him into the open. Tolland dismounted smoothly. He returned Isaiah's salute and then studied Lila for a moment before speaking. "Sergeant Holt, your rider reached us at dawn. He said massacre." "Yes, sir. At least 40 dead that we've counted. Possibly more. Survivors? 12, including this woman. Her name is Lila Cato. She witnessed the entire attack." Tolland turned to Lila. His expression softened slightly. "Miss Cato, I need to hear exactly what happened here. Everything you remember." Lila's throat tightened. She had told Isaiah already, told Samuel. But something about speaking to this officer, this representative of federal authority, made it feel different, more permanent. She told him everything. The courier arriving at dusk, Silas's strange behavior that evening, the shadows moving through the quarters, Uncle Reuben pushing her into the culvert, the sounds of killing that lasted until the storm drowned everything out. Tolland listened without interrupting, his jaw clenched tighter with each detail. "And the man responsible?" he asked when she finished. "Plantation Master Silas Breckenridge. He's still here?" "In the house," Isaiah said. "We've had eyes on it all morning. He hasn't attempted to flee." "Has he seen your scouts?" "Unknown, sir. We maintained distance." Tolland looked toward the mansion on its hill, then at the destroyed quarters below it. His eyes moved across the scorched ground and scattered debris with cold calculation. "I want a full perimeter established immediately," he said. "No one enters or leaves this property without my authorization. Position artillery crews on the northern and eastern approaches. If Confederate forces are in the area, I want this ground defensible." "Yes, sir." "Sergeant Holt, where are the other survivors?" "Hidden in a thicket 200 yards west. Under guard. They stay there until I give clearance. I want protection details doubled. These people are witnesses to war crimes, and they will be treated as such." "Understood, sir." Tolland mounted his horse again. "Show me the bodies." They walked the property in grim silence. Soldiers followed at a distance. Lila led them to the places she knew people had died. Behind the quarters, near the well, in the vegetable garden where children had been caught running. The captain's face remained emotionless, but his hands shook slightly as he dismounted to examine each site. He ordered soldiers to document everything, count the dead, note their positions, preserve evidence. When they reached the drainage culvert where Lila had hidden, Tolland crouched down and looked inside. The opening was barely wide enough for a person. Mud and debris still clogged most of it. "You survived in there," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." He stood slowly. "Then you'll testify to everything you saw. When this reaches Washington, your voice will be heard." Something broke open in Lila's chest. Not relief, exactly, but recognition. Someone with power believed her. A shout came from the northern perimeter. Tolland's head snapped up. "Captain! Movement on the east ridge!" Tolland pulled out a spyglass and scanned the horizon. His expression darkened. "Confederate cavalry. At least 40 riders. They're holding position, but watching us." "Do we engage?" an officer asked. "No. We maintain defensive posture. Our mission is to secure this property and protect the survivors. Let them make the first move." Orders rang out across the field. Soldiers shifted into defensive formations. Artillery crews positioned their guns. The entire regiment transformed from marching column to fortified position in minutes. That's when the drums started. Deep, rhythmic beating that carried across the plantation. Every soldier stood straighter. The sound rolled through the morning like thunder that wouldn't stop. It echoed off the mansion walls and vibrated through the ground. Leela recognized it from stories the elders used to tell. Soldier drums, war drums, the sound that announced an army's arrival. Inside the big house, a figure appeared on the second-floor balcony. Silas Breckenridge. He wore the same dark coat from earlier. In one hand he held a rifle. His gray hair was wild, and his face looked pale even from this distance. He gripped the balcony railing and stared down at the 500 black soldiers surrounding his property. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Silas raised his rifle. "Get down!" Isaiah shouted. The shot cracked through the air. The bullet struck dirt near the front line. Soldiers scattered and raised their weapons. Talon's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold fire! Nobody shoots without my order!" Another shot from the balcony. This one hit closer. A soldier cried out and grabbed his arm. "Return fire!" Talon commanded. "Controlled volleys! Target the upper windows!" The entire northern line opened up. Rifle fire exploded across the plantation. Bullets tore into the mansion's white walls and shattered windows. Silas disappeared from the balcony. More shots came from different windows. Silas was moving through the house and firing from multiple positions. "Advance by squads," Talon ordered. "Suppressing fire on all visible windows. I want that house surrounded." Companies broke formation and began moving forward under covering fire. They used the garden walls and outbuildings for cover. The tactical precision was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Lila pressed herself against the ground as bullets whined overhead. Amos pulled her behind a stone well. Isaiah fired toward the mansion with steady rhythm. The plantation had become a battlefield. Smoke filled the air. Soldiers shouted coordinates and warnings. Gunfire echoed endlessly. And somewhere inside that house, Silas Breckenridge fought alone against 500 men who had once been exactly what she was. The fighting stretched into afternoon. Gunfire became constant background noise like drumming rain. Smoke drifted thick across the yard. Soldiers moved in careful patterns between cover points, while bullets chipped stone and splintered wood. Silas fired from different windows, first the east side, then the north. He was fast for an old man, and knew his house well. Every angle, every firing position. But it wasn't just Silas anymore. Jacob Harlow and 3 other hired men emerged from a hidden trench near the stables. They had rifles and clear shooting lanes. The trench ran along the property's eastern boundary, where tall grass concealed the dug earth. A Union soldier advancing toward the barn took a bullet through the shoulder. He went down hard. 2 men dragged him back behind the garden wall. "They fortified the grounds," Isaiah said. He crouched beside Tolland behind an overturned wagon. This wasn't panic. This was planned. Tolland studied the terrain through his spyglass. "I count 4 shooters in that eastern trench. Possibly more. They've got crossfire coverage on our main approach. Artillery could flush them out. And level half the structures we need intact for evidence. No. We go tactical." Another volley came from the trench. Bullets kicked up dirt near the advancing line. The Union push slowed. Men took cover and returned fire, but couldn't get clean shots at targets below ground level. Isaiah glanced back at the thicket, where the survivors waited. Lila stood at its edge, with Amos keeping watch. Even from this distance, Isaiah could see her studying the battlefield with intense focus. She wasn't watching the soldiers. She was watching the land itself. "Captain," Isaiah said, "request permission to relocate the survivors further back. They're too exposed here." "Granted. Take a detail and move them to the northern tree line. Double the guard." Isaiah signaled Amos and jogged toward the thicket. Lila met him halfway. "We need to move you," Isaiah said. "Fighting's getting closer. I can help." You've helped enough. Your testimony? I don't mean testimony. Lila pointed toward the barn. You're trying to push through the yard, but Harlow knows you're coming. He built those trenches 2 years ago during flood season. They run all the way to the tool shed. Isaiah stopped. What else is there? Irrigation channels. Master Breckenridge paid for them 5 years back when he wanted to expand the tobacco field. They cut under the barn foundation and past the smokehouse. Wide enough for a man to crawl through? And they're still clear? Should be. We use them for drainage during storms. Isaiah looked back at Tolland's position, then at the barn. His mind worked through possibilities. Where do they exit? 3 places. One behind the tool shed, one near the chicken coops, one inside the barn itself. Inside? There's a hatch under old hay bales. Leads straight down. Isaiah grabbed her shoulders. You're certain? I cleaned those channels myself last summer. He ran back to Tolland and explained everything. The captain listened carefully while watching the stalled advance. If she's right, we can bypass their trench line entirely, Tolland said. Put men behind them while the main force maintains pressure from the front. I'll lead the flanking team. Take 10 men. Light arms only. If those channels are as narrow as she describes, you won't have room for rifles. Pistols and knives, then. Tolland called over Lieutenant Marcus Webb. I want sustained fire on that eastern trench. Make them keep their heads down. Don't let them see our left flank movement. Yes, sir. Isaiah assembled his team quickly. Young soldiers eager to break the stalemate. He briefed them on the plan and led them in a wide arc away from the fighting. Lila insisted on coming. You don't know which hatch is which, she said. Isaiah wanted to refuse. Bringing a civilian into combat violated every regulation. But she was right, and they didn't have time to search blind. Stay behind me. Don't move unless I say. They approached the barn from the western side, where tall grass provided cover. The structure loomed above them with bullet holes already pocking its weathered walls. Isaiah could hear Harlow shouting orders from the trench 50 yards away. Lila led them through a side door. Inside the barn smelled like old hay and animal waste. Dust floated through gaps in the roof, where sunlight cut down in golden shafts. She moved to the back corner and started pulling aside moldy hay bales. A wooden hatch appeared, 3 feet square with an iron ring handle. Isaiah pulled it open. Cool, damp air rose from below. A narrow channel disappeared into darkness. Water trickled somewhere distant. How far to the first exit? 30 yards, maybe. The tool shed hatch. And from there to behind their trench? 20 more. Isaiah looked at his men. Pistols ready. Single file. No talking once we're inside. If it collapses, we reverse and extract immediately. He went first, dropped through the hatch, and landed in ankle-deep water. The channel was exactly as Lila described, just wide enough for a man to move through if he crouched low. Rough stone walls pressed close on both sides. One by one his men followed. Lila came last with a soldier helping her down. They moved through the darkness with only dim light from the hatch behind them. Water splashed softly. Isaiah counted paces and kept one hand on the wall. The channel curved slightly left, then straightened. After 30 yards, light appeared ahead. The tool shed exit. Isaiah reached the hatch and listened. Gunfire continued outside but sounded distant. He pushed the hatch up slowly. Empty tool shed. Rusted saws and broken handles scattered on dirt floor. He climbed out and helped the others up. They were behind Union lines now, but perpendicular to Harlow's trench. Isaiah spotted the third hatch Lila mentioned near the chicken coops. That one, she whispered. It exits right behind their position. Isaiah signaled his men forward. They crossed open ground in quick dashes between structures, reached the chicken coop hatch. Isaiah positioned 4 men on either side. He counted down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. They yanked the hatch open and pistols leveled downward. Empty. The channel ran straight toward the eastern trench. Isaiah dropped in first. This section was drier and wider. He moved fast now with his team close behind. After 20 yards, the channel began sloping upward. He could hear Harlow's voice clearly now. The man was 10 feet above them, shouting for more ammunition. The channel ended at a grated opening covered with dead brush. Isaiah peered through. 4 men in the trench, backs to him, rifles aimed toward the Union line. He pushed the grate aside and emerged behind them with pistol raised. "Federal Army, drop your weapons." Harlow spun around. His eyes went wide, seeing Union soldiers rising from the ground behind him. For a moment, he seemed frozen between impossible choices. Then he raised his rifle. Isaiah fired first. The shot took Harlow in the chest, and he fell backward. The other 3 men threw down their weapons immediately and raised their hands. "Secure them," Isaiah ordered. The main Union line saw what happened and surged forward. With the trench neutralized, soldiers poured across the open ground. They reached the barn, the smokehouse, the tool shed. Silas's last defensive positions crumbled. His remaining men either surrendered or fled toward the house. Tolland's voice carried across the battlefield. "All companies advance! Surround the main structure!" The tide had turned completely. Union soldiers moved with coordinated precision now. They established firing positions around the mansion, cut off every exit. The house was surrounded. Isaiah climbed out of the trench and helped Lila up. She stared at the mansion where Silas was trapped. Her face showed something beyond satisfaction, something harder to name. "It's almost over," Isaiah said. That's when Corporal Amos came running from the northern perimeter. His face was pale. "Sergeant! Riders approaching from the East Ridge." Isaiah followed his pointing finger. Dust clouds rose against the afternoon sky. Lots of them. A mounted column moving fast toward the plantation. He pulled out his spyglass and focused on the approaching force. Gray uniforms. Confederate cavalry. At least 60 riders in formation. "They're early," Isaiah whispered. Captain Tolland saw them too. He immediately began shouting new orders. "All units defensive positions. Artillery crews target that eastern approach. Reform the line." The Union soldiers who had just taken the yard now scrambled to establish a new perimeter facing the opposite direction. The plantation that had been a battlefield was about to become one again. But this time, they would fight surrounded on both sides. The Confederate cavalry hit the eastern slope at full gallop. 60 riders poured down the hillside with sabers drawn and rifles raised. Their rebel yells cut through the afternoon air, sharp enough to make the younger Union soldiers flinch. The ground shook under the thunder of hooves. Captain Tolland stood in his stirrups and shouted commands that barely carried over the noise. "Second and third companies wheel right. Artillery crews prepare canister shot. Fourth company maintain pressure on the house." Isaiah watched the Union formation split like water around a stone. Half the soldiers turned to face the new threat, while the others kept their rifles trained on Silas's mansion. It was exactly what the Confederates wanted. Divided attention, divided strength. The cavalry reached flat ground and spread into a line. An officer at the front raised his saber high. The charge accelerated. "Fix bayonets!" Tolland screamed. Metal scraped against metal as hundreds of blades locked into place. The Union line braced for impact. Isaiah grabbed Lila's arm and pulled her toward an overturned supply cart near the smokehouse. "Get the others! Stay low!" Lila ran in a crouch back to where the survivors huddled near the tree line. Cora May clutched her skirt. The elderly woman named Ruth held 2 young boys against her chest. They all looked terrified. "Come on," Lila urged. "This way, fast!" They ran bent double across 30 yards of exposed ground. Bullets whined overhead. One kicked up dirt 2 feet from Lila's boots. She didn't slow down. She shoved the children behind the overturned cart and pressed herself flat against the ground beside them. The cavalry crashed into the Union line. The sound was terrible. Horses screaming, men shouting. Metal on metal. The sharp crack of pistol fire at close range. Isaiah saw a Confederate rider swing his saber at a Union soldier who blocked it with his rifle and yanked the man from his saddle. Hand-to-hand fighting erupted across the eastern yard. The Union artillery crews managed to fire one round of canister shot before the cavalry reached them. The blast tore through 3 horses and their riders. Bodies tumbled across the grass in a tangle of gray uniforms and brown horseflesh. But the Confederates kept coming. A wagon rolled down the hill behind the cavalry. Isaiah recognized it immediately. A small field cannon mounted on wooden wheels. Confederate gunners worked frantically to position it. They had portable artillery. "Everybody down!" someone screamed. The cannon fired. The ball screamed across the yard and smashed into the barn wall. Wood exploded in every direction. The barn roof sagged and collapsed on one side. Smoke and dust billowed out. From her position behind the cart, Lila watched the chaos unfold. Bodies everywhere. Blue and gray mixed together in desperate struggle. She saw a Union soldier stab upward with his bayonet and pull a rider down. Saw a Confederate officer fire 3 quick pistol shots before a rifle butt caught him in the face. Then something strange happened. 2 young boys in ragged gray jackets appeared at the edge of the fighting. They looked maybe 15 years old. Both were black. Both carried rifles that looked too heavy for their thin frames. They ran forward a few steps, then stopped, looked at each other, looked at the Union soldiers. One boy threw his rifle down. The other followed. They raised their hands and ran full speed toward the Union line. Confederate riders saw them and shouted. One turned his horse to chase them down. The boys dodged around fallen bodies and kept running. They reached the Union soldiers, who grabbed them and pulled them behind the line. Isaiah saw the whole thing happen. He was reloading his pistol when the boys stumbled past him. One of them had a scar across his left eyebrow, shaped like a fishhook. Isaiah knew that scar. "Jonas?" The boy turned. His eyes went wide. "Isaiah Holt?" "Jonas Reed." "Sweet Jesus!" Isaiah grabbed the boy's shoulders. "What are you doing in Confederate uniform?" "They made us," Jonas's voice cracked. "Master Shelby from Cross Creek Farm. He forced 6 of us to ride with them. Said if we refused, he'd shoot our families. We didn't want to fight. We didn't." "I believe you." Isaiah looked at the other boy. "What's your name?" "Samuel." "Samuel Porter. You're both safe now. Stay behind that wagon and keep your heads down." The Confederate officer who had tried to chase them down wheeled his horse around and fired at the Union line. His bullet caught Lieutenant Webb in the shoulder. Webb spun and fell. The battle continued to rage on both sides. Silas's men still fired from the mansion windows. Confederate cavalry pressed the eastern flank. Union soldiers fought in 2 directions at once. Lila watched it all from behind the overturned cart. Her mind worked through everything she saw. The smoke, the confusion, the way the Confederate riders bunched together when they regrouped. She noticed something. Their left flank stayed exposed every time they reformed their line. She crawled forward to where Isaiah crouched behind a water trough. "There's a gully," she said quickly. "Behind the smokehouse, runs all the way around to that stand of pine trees on the eastern ridge. Deep enough to hide men. Wide enough to move fast." Isaiah looked where she pointed. The gully wasn't visible from the Confederate position. Smoke and confusion obscured it completely. How many men could move through it? 40 maybe. Single file but quick. Isaiah's mind raced. If they could flank the Confederates while the main line held them engaged, he found Captain Tolland directing artillery placement. "Sir, there's a covered approach on their left flank. Request permission to take a flanking force." Tolland glanced at the gully. At the bunched Confederate formation. He nodded once. "Take 40 men. Hit them hard and fast. Break their line and they'll scatter." Isaiah gathered soldiers quickly. Men who had fought on the irrigation channels. Men he trusted to move quiet and strike fierce. He led them at a dead run toward the smokehouse, while the main line kept firing to hold Confederate attention. They dropped into the gully one by one. The earth walls rose 6 feet high on both sides. Perfect cover. They moved in a tight column through the depression. Isaiah counted paces. 200 yards. 300. They emerged behind the pine trees exactly where Lila said they would. The Confederate left flank sat completely exposed 40 yards away. Riders focused forward on the Union line. No scouts watching their rear. No pickets. Nothing. Isaiah raised his hand. His men spread into a firing line. 40 rifles aimed at the bunched cavalry. Fire! The volley tore through the Confederate flank like a scythe through wheat. 8 riders fell in the first 3 seconds. Horses bolted. Men screamed. The entire formation collapsed inward in confusion. Again! Isaiah shouted. Another volley. More men down. The Confederate officer tried to wheel his troops around, but they were already breaking apart. Some rode hard for the eastern ridge. Others dismounted and tried to fight on foot. Their coordination shattered completely. The Union main line saw what happened and surged forward. Caught between 2 forces, the remaining Confederates had no chance. They scattered in every direction. Within minutes, the charge had become a full retreat. Confederate riders fled back up the hillside. The field cannon crew abandoned their weapon and ran. Bodies in gray uniforms lay scattered across the bloodied grass. The Union soldiers raised a cheer that echoed across the plantation. But the fighting wasn't finished. From the mansion came a sound like something breaking inside a human throat. A scream that held no words. Silas Breckinridge appeared on the second-floor balcony with 2 rifles. He fired wildly in every direction. At Union soldiers, at fleeing Confederates, at the sky. His voice rose in incoherent rage. Smoke began pouring from the windows behind him. The house was on fire. The Confederate retreat left behind bodies and abandoned weapons. Riderless horses wandered across the torn-up yard. Union soldiers regrouped quickly, reloading rifles and checking the wounded. The air smelled like gunpowder and blood and churned earth. Captain Tolland surveyed the eastern ridge through his field glasses. No sign of Confederate reinforcements. The cavalry unit had broken completely. He lowered the glasses and turned his attention to the mansion. Smoke poured from several windows now. Thick black smoke that rose in columns against the late afternoon sky. "Form up!" Tolland shouted. "Surround the house! Nobody goes in or out!" Union soldiers moved into position. They formed a tight ring around the mansion at 50-yard intervals, rifles raised, bayonets fixed, every door and window covered. Isaiah walked toward the front entrance with 20 men behind him. The mansion loomed above them, 3 stories of white-painted wood and tall columns, the kind of house built to make everyone who approached it feel small. Today, it just looked like a tomb waiting to happen. "Silas Breckinridge!" Isaiah called out. His voice carried across the yard. "The plantation is surrounded. Confederate forces have retreated. Lay down your weapons and surrender." No answer. Just the crackle of fire somewhere inside. Isaiah moved closer to the front steps. "You are surrounded by 500 United States soldiers. There is no escape. Surrender now, and you will be taken for federal trial." A gunshot answered him. The bullet splintered wood 2 feet from his head. Isaiah ducked behind a stone fountain. From the second-floor window, Silas appeared like something already half-ghost. His face was streaked with soot. His eyes looked wild and unfocused. He held a rifle in one hand and a pistol in the other. "Get off my land!" His voice cracked. "This is Breckinridge property, protected by law." "The law is done protecting you," Isaiah said. "Come out now." "I'll burn it all first." Silas fired the pistol 3 times in rapid succession. The shots went wide. "Every inch, every board." "You'll get nothing." Lila had moved up behind Isaiah with several other survivors. She stared at Silas, framed in that window. The man who had owned her family for 3 generations. The man who had ordered her uncle killed, who had tried to erase every single one of them from existence. He looked small up there, pathetic, a scared animal backed into a corner. Isaiah glanced at her. He saw the expression on her face, saw what this moment meant. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "When we pull him out, you speak first. You and the others. Before any officer, before any federal authority. You will say what you need to say. I promise you that." Lila's throat tightened. She nodded once. Isaiah turned back to the mansion. "Silas Breckenridge, you have 1 minute to surrender. After that, we are coming in." "You want me?" Silas screamed. "Come get me then." He disappeared from the window. Isaiah counted to 60 in his head. When no response came, he signaled to his men. "Prepare to breach. Front and rear simultaneously. Watch for—" Glass shattered on the second floor. Something liquid splashed across the interior wall. The sharp chemical smell of lamp oil hit the air. "He's going to burn it," someone said. More glass breaking, oil spreading. Silas moved from room to room, pouring it across floors and furniture. His shadow passed behind windows like something already burning. "Get ready to pull him out," Isaiah ordered. "We need him alive." Lila felt her heart hammering. They had to get him out. Had to make him face what he'd done. Had to make him hear the names of every person he'd killed. She needed that. They all needed that. Flame appeared in an upstairs window. Small at first, just a flicker of orange against the darkening interior. Then it spread. Fast. Impossibly fast. The oil accelerated it. Within seconds, the entire second floor glowed from within. "Now!" Isaiah shouted. "Get in there now!" Union soldiers rushed the front door. They hit it with rifle butts and shoulders. The lock splintered. The door crashed inward. Smoke poured out like something alive. Thick, choking smoke that drove the men back, coughing. The heat hit them in waves, already too intense to approach. Through the smoke came laughter, high and broken. Silas's voice echoed down the stairwell. "You want justice? Here's your justice. Here's what you get." "No," Lila whispered. "No, no, no." She started forward, but Isaiah caught her arm. Other survivors pushed closer. Some were screaming for Silas to burn. Others screamed for soldiers to pull him out. The crowd surged with conflicting, desperate energy. Cora May grabbed Lila's hand. "Make them get him. Please, make them." But there was no getting him. The fire had spread too fast. The entire second floor was engulfed now. Flames licked out through broken windows. The heat drove everyone back another 20 yards. Silas appeared one last time on the balcony. Flames behind him. Flames beside him. He raised both arms like some kind of prophet. "I'll see you all in." The balcony floor collapsed. Silas dropped straight down into the inferno below. His scream cut off instantly. Lila's legs gave out. She fell to her knees in the dirt. Isaiah tried to help her up, but she shoved him away. She stared at the burning house with tears streaming down her face. "He took it," she said, her voice barely audible. "He took it from us." Again. The other survivors gathered around her. Some were crying. Some stood silent and hollow-eyed. Ruth pressed her hand to her mouth. Jonas and Samuel stood frozen, watching the flames. All of them had wanted to speak, to say names, to make Silas Breckenridge hear the litany of his crimes from the mouths of the people he'd tried to erase. He had stolen that too. The roof groaned. Support beams cracked with sounds like gunshots. The third floor sagged inward. "Everybody back," Tolland ordered. "Get clear." Union soldiers grabbed survivors and pulled them away from the house. Isaiah lifted Lila bodily and carried her. She didn't resist. She just watched over his shoulder as the mansion burned. The upper floor collapsed inward with a roar like thunder. Sparks shot into the darkening sky. The walls buckled. The tall white columns that had stood for 60 years cracked and toppled. The entire structure folded in on itself in a cascade of flame and destruction. The explosion of heat drove everyone back another 50 yards. Then slowly, the sound changed. The roar faded to a steady crackling. Flames still climbed high, but the violence of it was over. The mansion had become a pyre. The plantation fell silent except for the fire. Lila knelt in the dirt, surrounded by the 11 other survivors. They held each other and wept. Not for Silas, for themselves, for what they would never get to say. The flames burned on into the coming night. The sun dropped toward the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the battlefield. Smoke still rose from the ruined mansion in thin gray columns that caught the orange light. Captain Tolland posted sentries at every approach to the plantation. No one was getting in or out without his knowledge. The Confederate cavalry had scattered, but that didn't mean they wouldn't regroup. Union soldiers moved through the grounds collecting weapons and securing the perimeter. The wounded had been moved to makeshift tents near the tree line. Medical officers worked by lantern light. The dead, both Union and Confederate, were laid in rows and covered with canvas. Isaiah found Lila sitting with the other survivors near the smokehouse. They hadn't moved much since the mansion collapsed, just sat in small clusters watching the ruins burn down to coals. He approached slowly, gave them space to notice him coming. "Miss Cato," he said quietly, "when you're ready, I'd like you and the others to come with me." Lila looked up. Her eyes were red but dry now. She'd cried herself empty. "Where?" "To the house. What's left of it." Isaiah crouched down to meet her at eye level. "The fire's low enough to approach safely. I think there might be things in there worth recovering." "Like what?" Ruth asked. She sat beside Lila with Cora May pressed against her side. "Everything's ash." "Maybe," Isaiah said. "Maybe not. Stone doesn't burn. Metal doesn't burn. And men like Breckinridge kept records. If there's anything left that proves what happened here, we need to find it before the wind scatters it." Lila understood immediately. Evidence, proof, something to bring before federal authorities that couldn't be denied or dismissed. She stood slowly. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long. "All of us?" "All of you," Isaiah confirmed. "This is your land to reclaim, not mine." The 12 survivors rose together. They moved as one group toward the smoking ruins. Several Union soldiers joined them at a respectful distance, ready to pull anyone back if the structure shifted. The mansion had collapsed completely. What remained were piles of charred beams and broken stone. The white columns lay toppled like fallen trees. The balcony was unrecognizable. Everything that had been wood was now black skeletal remains. Heat still radiated from the debris. They couldn't get too close yet. Isaiah led them around the perimeter first, looking for safe approach points. The east side had collapsed outward instead of inward. Stone from the foundation lay scattered across scorched grass. Part of a wall still stood at an angle, held up by the chimney. "There," Lila said, pointing. "That was his study, behind that wall." Isaiah studied the angle of the debris. The roof had come down hard, but some of the interior structure might have created pockets, places where things could have survived. "Wait here," he told them. He signaled to 3 soldiers. "We're going in." Carefully, they moved into the ruins step by step, testing each piece of debris before putting weight on it. The heat was intense even now. Isaiah wrapped cloth around his hands before touching anything. The study wall had protected a small section of floor. Isaiah pushed aside a fallen beam and found the remains of furniture beneath. A chair reduced to charcoal, a bookshelf collapsed into splinters, and a desk. Heavy oak construction. The top was burned black and warped from heat, but the structure hadn't completely given way. Isaiah called for help, and 2 soldiers joined him. Together, they lifted the desktop away. The drawers underneath were partially protected. Metal handles had conducted heat and scorched the wood around them, but the interiors were mostly intact. "Miss Cato!" Isaiah called out. "Come here!" Lila picked her way through the debris. The heat made her skin prickle. She reached Isaiah's side and looked down at what he'd found. Papers, slightly charred at the edges but readable. Leather-bound ledgers with burned covers. A metal lockbox warped from heat but still sealed. Her breath caught. Isaiah carefully lifted out the first ledger. The pages were yellowed and smoke-damaged, but the handwriting was clear. Silas's handwriting. She recognized it from documents she'd seen him sign. She opened it with trembling hands. The first page was a property inventory dated 1859. Her stomach turned. The list included names she recognized. Her Uncle Reuben, her mother, herself. Listed with ages and estimated values like livestock. "This is it," she whispered. "This is how he saw us." Isaiah looked over her shoulder. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just waited while she turned pages. The ledger went back years. Purchases, sales, trades between plantations, each transaction recorded in Silas's meticulous handwriting with prices and dates and descriptions that made her skin crawl. The second ledger was worse. This one recorded punishments, whippings, confinements, forced separations of families, each entry clinical and precise. Numbers of lashes, reasons given. Names of those punished and those forced to witness. Leela found her own name 3 times. Once for speaking back. Once for teaching another child letters. Once for no reason listed at all. Ruth had moved closer. She read over Lila's shoulder and made a small, broken sound when she found her husband's name. 20 lashes for attempting to run. The date was 2 weeks before he died of infected wounds. "Keep looking," Isaiah said gently. "There might be more." There was. The lockbox required tools to open. One of the soldiers produced a bayonet and wedged it into the warped metal. The lock broke. Inside were loose papers and a small journal with a leather cover. Lila opened the journal to the most recent entries. March 2, 1864. Received word Yankees crossed into Caldwell County. Recruiting from slave stock for their mongrel regiments. Cannot allow my property to fall into their hands or testify to northern authorities. Have instructed Harlow to make necessary preparations. March 3, 1864. Storm provides cover. Will eliminate all remaining stock before dawn. Property must be purified before Confederate officers arrive for inspection. No witnesses, no complications. The handwriting was rushed toward the end, almost frantic, but the words were clear. The intent was documented, premeditated, calculated. Murder committed as policy. Lila's hands shook so hard she almost dropped the journal. Isaiah steadied her elbow. "This is evidence," he said quietly. "Legal evidence, written in his own hand." "He planned it," Lila said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "He wrote it down like he was planning a harvest." Other survivors gathered around. They passed the ledgers between them, found their own names, found the names of family members who hadn't survived. Each discovery brought fresh grief, but also something else. Proof. Undeniable proof. "We need to preserve all of this," Isaiah said. He signaled to Captain Tolland, who had approached from the command tent. "Sir, we've found documentary evidence of the massacre and other crimes. Request permission to establish a formal record." Tolland examined the ledgers carefully. His expression darkened with each page. "Granted. Set up a tribunal station. I want statements from every survivor. I want these documents cataloged and protected. This goes straight to Washington." Within the hour, Union soldiers erected a large tent on the east side of the plantation grounds, far from the ruins. They brought in tables and chairs and lanterns, set up a formal space that looked like what it was, a court. The survivors entered one by one. Officers recorded their statements in careful handwriting. Each person spoke their name clearly, described what they had witnessed, named the dead. Lila went last. She sat across from a young lieutenant who couldn't have been more than 20. His pen was poised over clean paper. "State your name for the record," he said. "Lila Cato." "Occupation?" She paused. What was she now? Not enslaved, not anymore. But not yet, whatever came after. "Survivor," she said finally. The lieutenant nodded and began writing as she spoke. She told everything. The night of the massacre, her uncle's sacrifice, the culvert, the sounds of the killing, the 11 others who had hidden in darkness, finding the bodies at dawn. Her voice stayed steady. She had practiced these words in her head for days now. They came out clear and precise. When she finished, the lieutenant set down his pen. "Thank you, Miss Cato. Your testimony will be submitted to federal authorities." She stood and walked out of the tent. The other survivors waited outside. They had all given their statements. 11 voices added to hers. 12 witnesses to what Silas Breckenridge had done. The sun had set completely now. Stars appeared in the darkening sky. Lanterns glowed across the plantation grounds. Union soldiers moved through the darkness with quiet purpose. Lila walked back to the ruins. The fire had burned down to embers now. Just red glowing coals where the mansion had stood. She held the first ledger in her hands, the one with the property inventory. She opened it to a page near the middle and began reading names aloud. Samuel Cato, Ruth Cato, Joseph Reed, Martha Reed, Elijah Cross. Her voice carried across the quiet grounds. Soldiers stopped what they were doing, turned to listen. Rebecca Cross, Daniel Worth, Sarah Worth, Thomas Quinn, Elizabeth Quinn. More soldiers gathered. They removed their caps, stood at attention. James Porter, Hannah Porter, Moses Grant, Esther Grant. The other survivors joined her. They formed a semicircle around the ruins. Cora May slipped her small hand into Lila's free hand. Lila kept reading, name after name. People who had lived and died on this land. People Silas had tried to reduce to numbers in a ledger. The entire camp fell silent. Only her voice remained, speaking the names into the night air, where they could never be erased again. 2 months passed as the Union Army secured the region, and the survivors lived under federal protection in a nearby camp. May arrived with warm winds and new grass breaking through scorched earth. The plantation grounds looked different now, quieter. The ruins of the mansion had been cleared away, leaving only the stone foundation exposed like bones. Union engineers had surveyed the land and marked boundaries for future settlement. Federal notices were posted declaring the property seized under military authority, pending post-war redistribution. Leela returned on a morning when clouds hung low and gray. She rode in a wagon with 3 federal officials and Isaiah, who had been assigned to oversee the transition of confiscated properties in the county. The wagon creaked along the old road, passing fields where weeds now grew among abandoned cotton rows. "The investigation is moving forward," one of the officials said. His name was Mr. Horace Denham, and he carried leather satchels full of documents. "Your testimony has been cited in 3 separate reports to the War Department. The ledgers you recovered are being used as evidence in cases across 4 states. Lila nodded but didn't respond. She watched the familiar landscape pass, the oak trees where children used to play, the creek bed where women washed clothes. Every inch of this land held memory. "There are families waiting for land like this," Denham continued. "Freed people who need places to settle, to farm, to build. The federal government is preparing legislation that will allow them legal ownership." "How long?" Lila asked. "After the war ends. Could be months. Could be longer." Denham adjusted his spectacles. "But it will happen. What you documented here helped make the case." The wagon stopped near the old smokehouse. Lila climbed down without waiting for assistance. Her feet touched ground that still felt like grief. Isaiah walked beside her as she moved across the yard. The other officials stayed by the wagon, consulting maps and property documents. "You don't have to do this today," Isaiah said quietly. "Yes, I do." She had brought markers with her. Simple wooden stakes that one of the camp carpenters had made at her request. 12 of them. One for each survivor. She walked to the drainage culvert where she had hidden. The entrance was still partially collapsed. She knelt and pushed the first stake into the soft earth beside it. "Lila Cato," she said aloud, "survived here." Isaiah watched without speaking. He understood what she was doing. She moved to the creek bed where Ruth had hidden beneath reeds. Second stake. Ruth Cato survived here. The barn loft where 3 children had pressed themselves into the rafters. Third stake. Cora May Reed survived here. One by one she walked the grounds, marking the places where life had persisted in darkness, where 12 people had held their breath and waited for dawn. The root cellar, the collapsed wagon, the hollow beneath the granary floor. Each location received its marker. Each survivor's name was spoken into the open air. By the time she finished, the sun had broken through the clouds. Light fell across the field in long, golden columns. "The documents are being copied," Isaiah told her when she returned. "Multiple sets. One goes to Washington. One to the Freedmen's Bureau office in Atlanta. One stays with the military archive here. And the original ledgers? Locked in a federal vault. Evidence for future trials." He paused. "There are other plantation owners who did similar things, Leela. Your testimony is helping build cases against them, too." She absorbed this information slowly. Her voice, the words she had spoken in that tent 2 months ago, was spreading, becoming part of something larger than this one place. "How many cases?" she asked. "At least 20 that I know of. More being investigated." Isaiah's expression was serious. "What happened here wasn't unique, but you made it impossible to ignore." The federal officials called them over to review boundary maps. They spread papers across the wagon bed and pointed to surveyed sections. "This northeastern quadrant could support 6 family homesteads," Denham explained. "We're estimating 40 acres each, with access to water and timber. The southern fields are better suited for communal farming until individual claims can be properly registered." Lila studied the maps, lines drawn over land she knew by heart, dividing it into futures she couldn't quite imagine yet. "Where will you go?" Denham asked her directly. "The camp is temporary. Families are already making plans to move north or west, some to cities, some to claim homesteads in Kansas." "I'm staying," Lila said. The officials exchanged glances. "Here? In this region? Not on this exact property, but nearby." She looked across the fields. "People will need help. Freed families who don't know how to navigate federal claims. Children who need teaching. Communities that need building." Isaiah smiled slightly. "The Freedmen's Bureau is hiring teachers and local administrators, people who know the area, who the community trusts. Then I'll work with them." It wasn't a decision made lightly. She had thought about leaving, about going somewhere that didn't carry these memories, but leaving felt like abandoning the dead, like letting Silas's final act, the fire that tried to erase everything, win. "This land doesn't belong to him anymore," she said quietly. "It doesn't even belong to the people who'll settle here next. It belongs to everyone who died on it, everyone who survived it. I'm staying to make sure that's remembered." Denham made notes in a small journal. "I'll submit your name to the Bureau office. They'll contact you about positions." The officials packed up their maps and prepared to leave. They had other properties to survey, other histories to document and redistribute. Isaiah offered to ride back with Lila, but she asked for time alone first. He understood, told her a wagon would return before sunset to bring her to camp. She walked the grounds as the afternoon deepened, touched the wooden markers she'd placed, checked that they were firm in the soil. At the edge of the property, she found the spot where the first bodies had been laid out for identification. The ground was darker there, stained. New grass was trying to grow, but it came up sparse and strange. She knelt and dug her fingers into the earth, pulled up a handful of soil that was part ash, part clay, part decomposed matter she didn't want to think about too closely. This dirt held blood and bone. It held the evidence of what had happened, but it also held seeds, roots, the possibility of something new breaking through. She let the soil fall through her fingers. When she finally climbed the ridge at sunset, the wind was blowing steady from the west. It carried ash that had settled in low places, lifting it up and scattering it across the fields. But it also carried seeds from wild grasses and flowering weeds, things that grew without permission. The sky turned orange and pink. Shadows stretched long across the land. Lila stood with her back to the setting sun, facing the open fields where the future would be built. She began to whisper names, not just the dead this time, the living too. Reuben Cato, Ruth Cato, Cora May Reed, Samuel Cross, Daniel Worth, Moses Grant. The wind carried her voice away, spreading it thin across the distance. Lila Cato, Isaiah Holt, Jonas Reed, Martha Quinn, Esther Porter. Every name a refusal to be forgotten. Every name a piece of history that would outlive the masters who had tried to erase them. She stayed on that ridge until the stars came out, and the last light faded from the western sky, whispering names into the darkness where they would live forever. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day!